Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2 o'clock session, Attracting an Audience, the Power of User-Centered Design. So my name is Kate Burnett-Isaacs. I'm the Director of Data Science at Infrastructure Canada. I am your moderator today, and it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce your panel for the session today. So first, to my left, we have Aaron Joffrey, Director General, Service Experience Design and Delivery, Service Canada. We have Christine Bellamy from the Director, gov.uk, Government Digital Services, United Kingdom. Andy Lewandowski, Digital Experience Advisor to the Federal Chief Information Officer, Office of Management and Budget, Executive Office of the President, United States of America. Mark Sullivan, Strategic Lead, Digital Identity, Canadian Banknote Company. Katja Vananen, Head Digitalization Unit, Public Sector ICT Department, Ministry of Finance, Finland, and Ryan Hum, Chief Client Experience Officer and Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Citizen Service Branch, Employment and Social Development Canada. So we have quite a big panel today. I'm going to invite Aaron to start with our opening remarks, and then we'll leave it all to you for your questions. So Aaron.
Thank you very much. So, hello everybody. Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Aaron Jaffrey. I'm the Director General for Service Experience Design and Delivery at Service Canada. And I am clearly from the UK working in Canada. And that gives me a fantastic opportunity to be able to say, user-focused design works. And it works in every context that you apply it to. So, whether you were coming from the UK context or we're working here in Canada, we see some fantastic opportunities and fantastic outcomes when we apply user-centered design. However, it's also really hard. And it's really hard because we come in from governments across the world, from people who are focused on requirements and focused on delivery. And actually, often user-centered design is seen as a distraction, something to make something look pretty, something to make it look nice. It's just for websites. When at the core of it, it is about the way that our service meets the needs of the citizens it serves. It is about the way that we understand the way that citizens need to engage with the service so they get the policy outcomes that they desire and they deserve. It actually means rethinking the way that we think about delivery as a fundamental part of the service design cycle. And when we do that, then we can get some fantastic outcomes. Now, I can wax lyrical about some of the things that we've done previously in the UK, but I'd rather talk here today about things that can happen and are happening today in Canada. Over the weekend, our new Minister for the Service Canada, Terry Beach, provided some flavor of that when he talked about the Retirement Hub, which was a user-centered focused project for seniors to start to understand when you're approaching your retirement age, what kind of information, how do you prepare for retirement? How do you prepare for the information you need to get from the federal government? How do you prepare for the information you need from the provincial government? How do you get yourself in order? Driven in a short, focused time frame, that user-centered design project has even got rave reviews on Reddit. That's how good it is. Similarly, the OAS benefit estimator, how might you understand better how, as you approach retirement age here in Canada, what you're going to get from the federal government? A user-centered design project, which is now being used by Service Canada staff all the way across the country to help them to shortcut the calculations they need to do for citizens who walk into Service Canada hubs daily to say, I don't know how much money I will get when I turn 65. This is real life work that's making a real difference to Canadians today, and it's only possible because of user-centered design.
Thank you. Oh, that was brilliant, wasn't it? That was fabulous. I'm Chris Bellamy, and I'm based in the UK and work for GDS, Government Digital Services, and I have the privilege of being the director of gov.uk, which probably many of you in the room have sort of heard about over time. It's interesting where you find us. So we're sort of 12 years in to the sort of premise that user-centric design will change experiences for users. And it's a really interesting 12 years. And in that time, we've been able to sort of really live by this message of simpler, cleaner and faster for everybody, making government that. However, 12 years on, there's so much more to do than those clear words. What we've done so far is we've put together and have worked really closely with teams both in the UK and across the world on having this sort of really clear practice of how we do user-centric design. If this hasn't been shared with you in the room before, this is some of the sort of key ways that we look at it, making this the experience for our users and not for policy. We think about it in the way where we can think about patterns, all the way down to fonts and creation of colour and the way we put our experiences together. But fundamentally, at the heart of it is how we talk and interact with our audiences. And when you find us after 12 years, what you get is an operation which is a clean service, which fundamentally has made it easier for people in the UK to get to services and to be able to have a relationship with government that feels like it's about them. But 12 years on, when we look at it in the UK, it's quite interesting. There's so much more to do. So for our population, 1% of the population is about 700,000. So goodness knows what 1% in your country is. And for every percent we don't reach, and in our area that's about 20%, the numbers are still enormous. And for the people that do use us, when they come to us, if they get to the start button, the bit where really great user-centric design works, and they press that button, then this service, those 12 years of history really kicks in. And we're able to make it very straightforward for users to get to the services that they need and have a good experience. What you find is now a sort of a bit of a crossroads where we are back at the table and learning. So what you don't find is this sort of an arrogant UK that's saying we've just got this sorted. What we have realised is there's just more to do. And I've just used this example to sort of bring it to a head. The work we're now doing isn't just about making it easy for people to get the benefits that they require, although that can still be hard, or make sure they know where they are through a passport application. Or it's really also about serving people at point of need. And because we have 12 years history, in the last year, we've been able to really use that power of user-centric design to make an even more impactful difference to users. And in this instance, with the work that we've done directly with Ukraine in the last year, we've been able to make it possible to use user-centric design at a point when it was really needed, which was to help people both bring people from Ukraine to the UK, and when they landed, they had a good experience. And that was all done online. And we couldn't have done that without the last 12 years. And so I sit here today as an organisation that gets user-centric design, has been doing it for 12 years, has been learning and growing in that 12 years. But now we get to sort of the point where our services are fundamentally changing, and we need to think about personalised services, which are all about the user, not just when they have a need and they run to a website to find it, but before then, when they're worried 7 days before then because they're worrying if they can pay their school fees and they can't get their kids to school because they don't know how to get them on public transport because they're poor. We've got to really crack it when it's not just about the start button, it's about everything that happens before then. And so going forward into this year, our work is all about how we think about end-to-end services using user-centric design, but not just the power of the website, but how we use it across third-party platforms, all the social channels, how we think about it in the mobile app space, how we think about it when we send people notifications, which can make people more worried. So our plan for the next 5 years is to take all those good learnings of user-centric design and almost amplify it across all of our channels. Oh, you.
All right, thanks so much. Let me start by saying the following statement. The United States of America is a very large place. And as United States Federal Chief Information Officer Claire Martirana previewed this morning in her keynote address, we kind of have a top-down policy-making approach given the size and the scale. So we have 330 million American citizens, but when you count international visitors, students, workers, immigrants, asylees, businesses, both domestic and international, who interact with the federal government, we serve more than 400 million individuals, businesses or other entities per year. Arguably, we're the largest service provider on planet Earth, in addition to being the largest employer with 2.1 million federal workers, as well as more than 6 million contractors, consultants, vendors. So we're a really large operation. Like our country, our federal government is kind of set up in a federated model, where we've got our 3 branches of government at the top, and then our agencies who actually are providing the services to the public have a lot of independence. So our challenge in the digital space is to figure out how do we integrate those experiences across agencies, across journeys, across major life events, and how do we do that in a way that meets today's expectations, which are higher than ever for digital to be the default. So this is the vision for the public experience. It should be simple, seamless, and secure. So simple is pretty straightforward. The public wants answers that are easy to understand. They want to click in as few clicks as possible to get where they need to go. And they want their self-service online transactions to be easy to use. Seamless is how we get to that integrated experience that's cross-journey, cross-agency, and then secure. So everything we do has to be secure by design, secure by default. We have an obligation to protect the privacy and the information that we collect from the public and provide transparency into how we use that information in providing services and benefits to the public. So simple, seamless, and secure is our vision and our North Star. This is what the public expects. I am not promising a master chatbot to rule them all, but how do I apply for Medicare is step 0 for the public when they use third-party search engines to get to government. So many of our federal workforce, members of our federal workforce, focus on the design of their website's homepage or making the best digital service or the best piece of web content. But that's not actually where most of the public starts. They actually start outside of the government ecosystem. And this is the answer or the question that they ask. The answer is actually not going to Medicare.gov, it's going to socialsecurity.gov because we bundle the retirement benefits with Social Security along with applying for Medicare, which is our healthcare benefit. So this is what the public expects. 10 days ago, the White House released digital experience guidance. It's called Delivering a Digital-First Public Experience. So we're gonna execute on this vision by making digital the default to meet the majority of the population where they are, which is on their mobile devices, but multi-channel. We also have an obligation to make sure that government is accessible to all people of all abilities. There are folks who just prefer paper or prefer calling someone and hearing the reassuring voice of a human being on the other line when they have questions about government services or benefits. But digital is the default. So we're really gonna be focused on not just digitizing existing government services, but wholesale redesigning them, because digitizing a government form that is currently on paper is kind of digitizing bureaucracy. And we think that we can be much more creative in that. And that's where human-centered design and research come into play to drive the requirements coming out of the wants and needs of your end users or your customers. Claire previewed this slide at the end of her keynote this morning. These are the cross-government or government-wide pillars that we think are required to provide that simple, seamless, and secure digital-first public experience. And what we've done is we not just wrote the policy standards, which is the first row in red on top, but we have also articulated the outcomes that we want that policy standard or standards to drive for the public. Okay, so it's not just about making sure you're checking the compliance box for web accessibility. We want digital services and websites to be accessible to all people, as many people as possible, people who rely on assistive technologies. Claire also mentioned brands, design, search, content. These are all expectations for modern digital first and self-service experiences. So this is what we're focused on. And the immediate next step, if you read this guidance, it's 32 pages. It includes more than 100 agency actions and standards. The immediate next step for agencies is to focus on that first circle, which is analytics, because you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So we need to know what are the top websites, digital services, transactions, and other services that your customers, members of the public, are coming to you for, and help you focus on those. In the government-wide space, our General Services Administration will be focused on expanding existing tools and government-wide resources like the United States Web Design System, but also developing brand new federal-wide standards related to brand, content, search engine optimization. So the idea here is that agencies can no longer operate independently and go, chart their own path in the digital space. We have to integrate it and make sure that everyone is operating off of the same rules and standards and policies. And that's it for me, at least for the opening remarks. I've got more to say later.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Sullivan. I'm the digital identity lead for the Canadian Banknote Company. For those that might not know the Canadian Banknote Company, you are probably familiar with some of our products. We produce the Canadian currency as well as Canadian passports, same thing in New Zealand, and we also have a large border management presence. So if you ever traveled through the Caribbean, there's a good chance you've traveled through one of our border systems. So you can see the breadth of our company reaches across a number of different markets. So my responsibility is on the digital transformation and sort of the future thinking of where all these things are going to go in the future. Notably, we have been working with the state of Virginia on their mobile identity program. So I do serve as an appointee of the Standards Council of Canada to the International Standards Organization, which wrote a big technical standard on how we can start digitizing things like driver's licenses. It's about as exciting as it sounds. But one of the things that shockingly coming out of these standards groups from us and a bunch of the technical guys getting together and writing them is they don't necessarily come out being the most user-friendly things. That's not at first and foremost. We focus on security, privacy, and the overall objectives of the standard. So then it comes out and we actually have to produce systems according to these standards. And there's a big question on how do you make these things great to use? How do you make them accessible to everyone? And that's not necessarily documented for you. So you got to set out and attempt to do that journey on your own. So when we set out with the state of Virginia, of course, some of the requirements came down and it was, we want one of these. We want one of these mobile driver's license systems, and it has to be standards compliant. So today I'd like to, answer any of your questions you might have of what it's like from the private sector's perspective, working with the public sector and, helping them just even take the baby steps on this journey, educating them on the importance of this and, following through a program through to implementation. So happy to answer any questions about that. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katja Väänänen from Ministry of Finance, Finland. From digitalization, I'm head of digitalization unit. Public sector digital services are very popular in Finland, even though it is voluntary to people to use them. So what actually makes them popular? There has been some measures for sure that we have been taking. First of all, there has been a strong political commitment to reform the public sector and digitalize public sector services for already several government periods, maybe perhaps from 2010 since at least. The second of all, during this time we have also prepared some legislation to, for example, that obliges the public administration to use and to offer joint digital support services, and on the other hand, to take, for example, accessibility into account when they develop their own digital services in different sectors. The joint digital support services consist, for example, messages and authorization. And the authorization service is one of our most popular services that we have. One example on a human-centric service development from one sector I can mention here is COTS, C-O-T-S, implementation at the Finnish Tax Administration. With one taxation software, customers can handle their own taxation with one easy to use digital service. And I can tell from my own experience, it works very well. And in general, the tax administration is seen as very trustworthy with their digital services. So in Finland, most of the public services are already have already been digitalized and are quite well functioning. We have also gathered some information packages around different life events, such as childbirth or moving to another city and so on. But basically they are still separate, different digital services. So the next step, what we want to take is to create life and business event-based automated and digitalized service packages. The aim is to streamline the use of services, to develop seamless service paths, and to improve the functioning and interoperability of the production of public services. This is supported by our new government program that was published this summer. Also, one of the objectives of Finland's digital strategy is to define and digitalize approximately 40 of the most significant and impactful life event service packages by 2030. But the success will depend on the development of key areas, such as seamless cooperation between different service providers is very important. Also, uniform legislation that enables digitalization and the utilization of the data structure, interoperability and compatibility, shared digital infrastructure and support for digital services. Thank you.
I have no slides, so this doesn't matter. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to tell a story. So a number of years ago, I got together with my partner. We were dating a little bit long distance for a little bit and finally moved in together, moved into my condo, right? And I felt really, really uncomfortable with this because there was this weird power dynamic because I owned the place and he didn't. And so I said to him, let's buy a place together. Seems pretty reasonable, right? Huge fight, right? And not because he didn't want to own a place or wanted to spend his life with me, though I'm not sure if he does now. It was because I didn't understand his context, right? We had such a big fight and lots of tears and lots of crying afterwards. And the reason was because I didn't understand his context. He was $50,000 in debt because of student loans, right? I started off too big. I didn't understand what he was going through, right? Part of his paycheck, every single salary was going towards paying off his student loans, right? And so this idea of saving money for a down payment was like this huge slap in the face, right? I didn't understand what he was going through. I learned my lesson, right? I still wanted to get a place together. And so I started prototyping different ways of asking him whether or not to have a place. And I kept going smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So what ended up working was, do you want to buy a house together? Do you want to save, money? Do you want to create this RRSP system? It was, do you have $10 that you want to automatically put into savings, right? Every paycheck, $10, $25, and that's what worked. Make it super, super small. And then after a couple months, I asked, oh, how much is in your account now? Right? And then he was like, oh, it's this much. Then I'd ask again, oh, tax time came around. He was able to pay down his loans a little bit more. It's like, hey, it seems like you have a little bit more money. Do you want to increase it from $25 to $50? Yeah, I think I could do that, right? And then within a couple of years, we bought a place together, right? I say this because we don't understand the context of our users, right? Where I last worked, one of our major stakeholders to Parliament said, your services are purposely intimidating, designed to reduce public engagement. And to some degree, she's right. She's totally right. And whether or not we design it purposely, I'm not too sure. But we don't think about all these things. We think that, oh, we could do this demo 15 steps, everything's fine, it's easy for us, but we know the context, right? We don't understand the cognitive load that people have, right? We don't have a sense of the scarcity that they have, whether it's time or money, right? All these things matter in people's lives and matter about how they interact with our service, right? And so I just got appointed to the position. I've been using like different examples. I talk about a $3 million question, right? So I found one of the really nice things about being in the regions is no one knows what an ADM is, right? No one cares. And when I wear a hoodie and sneakers, no one's really intimidated by me, right? And so I get to ask these really fun questions like, what forms are bothering you? What questions are bothering you? And there was one question, it's so convoluted, about, are you born between April 7th, 1978 and March 31st, something 1981? If so, question part A is, are you a naturalized citizen? Part 2, and it's this 4-part question, but no one has the time when they're filling out forms, right? And so what ends up happening is they fill out the question wrong. They fill out the question when you don't need to fill out the question, which ends up being a load on our service counter staff because it happens so frequently, 20 to 25% of the time that people answer it wrong, that every single Service Canada officer needs to spend 1 minute on that question, right? And then if they mail it in, it's even worse, right? If they mail it in, then they call to check the answer. If they don't reach them, they can't leave a message unless the person has their name on their voicemail box because it's private information. Then they play phone tag back and forth, right? If it says Service Canada, some people think that it's a scam, right? So they don't answer it. So it ends up costing even more money if you mail it in, which is the reason why I call it the $3 million question. All because we didn't think about the load and the time that people have when they're filling out the forms. They don't have time, right? My partner didn't have time or money to think about buying a house, right? And this happens to all our teams. Chris brought up a good point. Can I say Chris? Brought up a really great point about using human-centered design or user-centered design for reaching the unreached, right? And we had this conversation in London a couple of days ago where a team of ours was interviewing people for old age security. And we were looking specifically at the people that are hardest to reach. In this case, it was homeless individuals that we were interviewing. And we were at the shelter and we were talking to the social worker and we said, hey, do you help people with the old age security application? I said, of course we do, because it's free money and it gets people off the street. And then we have a new bed, right? How long does it take for you to help someone with this form? And the form's pretty easy and the questions are pretty simple. Whenever I ask this question, I usually make people answer, but it's weird in this crowd. So most people say, an hour, 2 hours, a couple of days. The answer was 15 months. Because when the person comes in, they don't care about a hypothetical benefit for a government that's never helped them, right? What they care about is what are they going to eat today? Where are they going to sleep tonight, right? And it's only after you start solving those kind of things is the person able to start talking and then starting to collect the information that's required to fill out the form. 15 months. This is not far off from my mortgage journey, right? We have to think about users, and it's so easy to start. Just start asking and talking to people. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Great introduction and emphasizing the importance of user-centric design. So I'm going to turn it over to the audience first for questions, please. We have the experts on stage that are, not just willing, but excited to be here and speak with us. So I invite you to the microphones. We also have assistants around. So if you have a question, raise your hand, please. We have a question over here.
Thank you so much. I can yell. Thank you so much. There's a wealth of information on this panel. Thank you so much. I really appreciated your slides and your expertise. So now that you have this knowledge and you've done all this research and you've interviewed mothers with crying babies trying to access mat leave, not that that's a real example, how do you now take this information and apply it so that the public can actually use this newfound information and be able to access services better?
Right, that's a fantastic question. So what we'll do is we'll start to my left here and go down. Please, I think we'll have lots of questions. I'm sure you have a lot to say, but we'll try and keep it concise. So over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to the heart of the delivery conversation, doesn't it? I mean, going out and understanding people's context is only essential when you are delivering for those people's context, and actually streamlining that cycle from the point of saying, we understand, the challenges and the context of a mother who is about to have a baby, and actually getting them a service they need is fundamentally important. And why I say that's important to the delivery cycle is that valid insights that were made, some are long-standing, but ultimately all of our expectations of the technology we're using and the way we want service are changing all the time. So valid observations from 5 years ago are good insights, but they're not very useful if you only deliver a service 5 years later. And so really it's part of, for me, user-centered design is just part of a reshaping of the way we deliver services. It's a fundamental input, but ultimately the output is the service we deliver through multifunctional teams, bringing together researchers, designers, engineers to streamline a service that says, here's the problem, we now understand the context better. How do we meet that context through a process of prototyping, of testing things quickly, of understanding the scale of it and getting that delivered as quick as possible. And it is absolutely possible to do that in a government context and to do that at scale. But it does require us to think about the way we deliver services as user-centered design requires us to think about our citizens and the way we deliver policy in a very different way. So it is a key input, but is only valuable, exactly to your point, that we actually do something with it and we deliver a prototype and we test with that user group. Hey, we think that you meant this. How does this now fit? Does this reduce your cognitive load? Does this help you to get to the next stage? And if it doesn't, then we do something else. But let's not be afraid to experiment and let's not be afraid to test ideas. Getting to that end service as quickly as possible is the most important thing.
I agree with all of that. It's just a couple of bills, really. I think when you're actually in the point of deciding quickly what the decision is, the key is speed, right? Because the danger sometimes is user-centric design, we can get stuck in it for almost like make it too perfect. So at the point where you think you've got enough information to get into delivery, that should be with the user in mind. So the user should be doing that with you. So the user groups you've had along the way, this is the real critical point where you want to work with them really closely. I think it's really helpful if you set clear deadlines. I'm a product manager at heart, and actually that same deadline, so it's a little scary. But I think in this context, you need to, because you need to bring all departments with you on that journey. And I think if you can really make it stick, there's two things that are the learnings from the UK. If you've got a mandate, it's easier. If departments know that they've got to change and you are a department that's working for that change, the mandate really helps because it means everybody's in on it. And if you can work really closely with policy so they feel that they are part of the solution, if your policy makers in the room, it's absolutely wonderful that you're here, because this only works if policy design works together, because that's where the win is. If you can get that right, you've cracked it.
Iterate, 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 and validate, validate, validate. Monolithic projects, programs, solutions, spending 2 years digitizing a government form, I don't think gets the actual benefit or the service to the person given the time that they need it in their lives. A great example of this and a key learning during the pandemic was in our social safety net benefits. We did a lot of research. What do people actually need when they're applying for unemployment insurance? The attorneys in the government say, well, we legally need to collect all this information and have a record of the form and have a PDF version and have it backed up 3 times, to protect the agency from litigation. But what does the actual person need? The person needs a check direct deposited into his or her account. Okay, so I think you can actually take away a lot of the complexity when you just focus on what's the actual outcome or what's the actual need that the end user or person from the public actually wants. I always tell my design teams that your fidelity of your solution should match the fidelity of your understanding of the problem. A lot of teams start with the monolithic solution, the beautiful high fidelity mock-ups of beautiful digital experiences, and nobody stopped to ask an actual customer, do you have internet at home? And the answer is no. I have a mobile pay-as-you-go phone with low bandwidth. I prefer text, SMS, text communications, and I'd actually just prefer filling out a form in person or over the phone. Okay, so validate those assumptions early and often.
That's great. I think the one thing I would add there is, as you go through the user-centric design process and you take this input and you sort of build that into your design of your solution, right? This is how this needs to function to serve this, this persona, this user journey, whatever it might be. What we've done is we've actually brought in our UX and UI design experts, and they've become sort of the advocates for those user stories throughout the design process. So the point of iterating, it's easy to lose track of some of these things along the process of getting to your end goal, your end implementation. Other changes might come in that might derail, your original design for that. So keeping the constant lens of that user perspective on it through sort of a dedicated person that's, their role is to advocate for all these stories and journeys. That was very helpful for us in designing our program.
So I answer from the point of view of life events, and having a child is certainly a life event. And maybe the goal should be actually that the mother should be able to concentrate on the baby and not to have all the time spent with different authorities and public services. So, but the truth is that there is several public officials, companies, and communities that she might need to deal with. And the challenge is, what should that would ease this situation is that it should be possible to transfer data and information between the different authorities seamlessly, so that they don't always ask the same questions all the time, and you need to give the same information and data every time. So that would diminish the need to repeatedly request the same information, and then we go to that the data should be in digital and structured form, so that the greater automation of services and associated processes would become feasible, and that's something that what we are now trying to do during next years.
I love all these. I love all these. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. I love all these answers because they tackled it in a variety of different ways. I mean, One is you have some sort of insight, right? And then turning that into actions, right? In your example, it's about how do we consider it a life event, right? And how do we think about life events bundled up together so that you don't have to do 17 different services, you do one application and then it automatically pre-populates everything else. In service design, you have a couple of different tools that you could use, whether it's different, you could change messages, you could change steps, you could change, the artifact that you're using. There's a whole variety of different things. And so I think in government, we oftentimes think about how to prove something is correct versus how do we turn an insight into action. And I think more and more we have to start thinking about how to create insights into action and then test those actions afterwards. Those points about iterating are so bang on. I remember we did some user testing, we did some user interviews, we heard something from someone, we thought, oh, let's build an app for that. We did a paper prototype, we brought it back out to the people and we said, oh, you said that this was a problem, here's our solution. And they're like, oh no, I would not ever use that. I don't want government to have that information. Like, oh, okay, great, thanks. Ripped it up and then we made another iteration on what we thought could be a solution until we got it right. Those paper prototypes were so valuable because it didn't waste 6, 9, 12 months of development time, right? And then the last point that I really liked that people brought up was, I call it fishing with friends. So bring people along with you, right? It's a lot easier to bring people on your user testing, your user research with you so that they hear firsthand and then they don't question it afterwards, right? You don't have to summarize it for them. You don't have to say, oh, well, that wasn't their context, so that's not actually true. This is what happened. So fishing with friends and making sure that your IT team or your comms team or your policy team are with you on this journey is so important.
Thank you, everyone. So our next question is at the back of the room over there.
Hello, am I audible? My name is Bhuvanesh Avasthi. I'm a behavioral scientist with the Immigration Department here. I heard a lot of iteration here, which is wonderful, and a bit of experimentation. But when you talk about, is there a typical user? That's my first question. And second, do you distinguish between what a user tells you versus what a user actually does? Something called voice preferences versus revealed preferences. And if you do, how do you bridge the gap? Thank you.
Great. 2 sets of questions. Maybe we'll switch it up a little bit and start with Ryan.
There is a total difference between what people say versus what people do. And you have to watch what people do. That is one of the hardest things to do as a user and as a researcher, to have that lens. So important. And there's a variety of different techniques that you could use, fly on the walls, listening to call center calls, whatever it is, to better understand what people do versus what people say that they're going to do. I almost never ask users to give me a solution because it's not their job. It's our job to fix it, not their job to come up with ideas, right? And then the last thing around the average user, right? We do that way too much. We focus too much on this hypothetical average user and not enough about the extremes. And the extremes, the 20% or the 10%, are probably the ones who call you the most, who use your front counter service the most, who cause you actually the most difficulty because of case complexity. And so if you're not designing for the most complex or the highest needs, then you're actually you're leaving so much on the table.
Catherine.
Okay. It's not possible to have a model that fits all. But we take the average cases as life events that what we know that a lot of people need at some point of their life, and create the packages around these kind of situations. When we talk about a certain one digital solution or service, then we do use different user groups along the way, like elderly people or with children and so on, just to try to make sure that different aspects are taken care of. One interesting group is youth. You should think that they are the ones that know how to use digital services, but actually they are the ones who have the most biggest problems, because digital they don't use any more email and so on. They just are in the social media and they behave totally differently than we who are actually developing those services. And that's a big challenge, and also a possibility to take the services to the next level. Thank you.
Touching first on what users say versus what they do, both aspects are very, very important. I think you really need to listen to them and hear what they're trying to do, understand that motivation, but then equally important is actually observing, how they interact. Again, from my perspective with, a software application, for example, if you're just watching what they do, you might try to streamline things in that regard, but be kind of missing the entire context, what they're thinking of, and really missing their whole intent. And then, vice versa, if you're just listening to what their motivations are, that's not giving you a lot of practical experience in how they're going to go ahead and use that information. I think on the other point, I would agree with Ryan and everything he said on that. That was spot on.
I will answer the first question. Is there a typical user? No. And I think in the digital space, there's another thing we could probably ask, or another question we could ask, which is what's the literacy level or the norms for someone using digital tools? We find in our user research and usability testing that younger generations who are on their mobile devices for 4, 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, they love the digital services that we're designing, and they have adopted certain usability patterns in how they navigate mobile apps and websites and experiences. A great example is, on a website, most users look in the top right corner for the sign-in button. That's a common web pattern. But we also have other user groups, not just based on age, but we have immigrants who are naturalizing to the US. We have veterans who have service-connected disabilities and injuries. Like there is no one user. And in the digital experience guidance that we released, and let me plug it again, you can go to whitehouse.gov, search digital, and it's the first result. There's a great example in the content section. So we kind of tell our federal agencies there's a median reading level for the American public, it's 8th grade. We actually think it's lower, but the study that we cited says it's 8th grade. But you have to understand your audience and your core customer and user group and write at the reading level that is appropriate to them. So for scientists or expert level, it should be much higher. For those with low English proficiency or lower reading level, write lower. And so it's very simple. So this is a user-centered design panel. Like the user should always be guiding the solutions.
It's a really good question, I think. I've got 2 key points to build on. I think we should test known problems quite quickly. So I think we need to be careful that we keep testing the same thing and we try and make something green a bit greener. We've just not got enough money for that. So everybody in this room probably has budgets that are getting smaller, teams that are getting smaller, and the problems are getting bigger. And the expectations of our users, especially post-COVID, they want this to work as good as their best banking app, and we've just not caught up. So I do think we need to challenge that a little bit and think about where can we now spend our time. So I believe we're at this point. Small user groups really early on in the process is brilliant. And if it's a known problem, go fast and release. There's a moment where you need to test at scale, otherwise there's too much risk in it. And we should learn from the commercial market on that. Most commercial digital problems will be solved with, say, 1% of audiences. So if you're going to go live with anybody, you should have tested it with 1% of your audience, which in yours is enormous. And it's massive in the UK. So if we have an average user of sort of 90 million coming to gov.uk, If we're testing with 20 users, it's brilliant to get us going. It's brilliant to get into the detail on a known problem. But there's a moment where we really need like 1% of people using it, and we should iterate then. Because then we do know what their patterns are. We do know what buttons they're pressing. We do really know where they get stuck. And it's not just a maybe stuck, it's a real stuck, and we can change it. And I think in government, we've got to tackle that problem now. We've got to move sort of out of the small classroom and out of the lab and fundamentally onto screens to do more testing, because if we use both together, it will get us further quicker.
I mean, answering it a slightly different way. So there is no common user, but everybody has common rights, common needs of their government. We have the right to demand and expect that our government spends our taxpayers' money efficiently and effectively. We have the right to demand and expect that our governments keep our data secure. We have the right and the expectation to demand that our governments deliver policies to us the best way they possibly can to make sure that we, the citizens, can effectively get on with our lives. So there is no common user, because if you look across the room here, clearly one of us is the same. However, we have some common rights and we have common needs that really are the basis of any delivery. So there is absolutely understanding individuals' contexts and their education levels and what they want to get out of a service and what's going to serve them best. But when you go through the cycle of a delivery, certain things also have to play in. So there is a necessity sometimes to duplicate certain parts of a service because you're learning which is the best. But once you've learned the best, to Christine's point, optimize. Optimize on that so you can go faster. There is a need in a delivery cycle not just to make the screens great, but actually to make sure the technology that supports it delivers effectively, efficiently, securely. So do that and do that at scale. How do you actually reduce the cognitive load, not just of our people, of our citizens, but of our teams so that we can move fast and we can solve those, to Ryan's point, those really difficult, vulnerable questions on the edges, which you'll never get to if we keep solving the same problem time and time again. But that starts with us understanding that every single one of us as a citizen in this country has common rights and common demands that should be expected of every single service that we get from government. They should be secure, they should be easy to use, they should be seamless. I'm going to steal the Americans one now. But ultimately, that we are expecting our governments to spend it effectively and efficiently and doing the best they can with our taxpayers' money.
Thank you. All right, I know there's some burning questions out there, but that is time for us, unfortunately. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion. I think it's